All right. I want to welcome everyone to UAWD's third annual White Shirt Day celebration. I'm your host or MC for this event presentation. My name is Eric Truss. I'm out of Local 600 Dearborn Rouge, Ford Motor Company. I have been with the UAW as a member for 28 years and have also served on the Local 600 General Council, which is the governing body of the leadership of Local 600. I am also a member of UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy, where I currently serve as a financial secretary, a current member of the steering committee. I want to thank our previous hosts of the last 2 years, Sean Crawford, for allowing me this opportunity to host and considering that he was a union activist and a GM worker of Local 160, Flint, Michigan. And speaking of Flint, Michigan, that's where this event took place. That's why we are here today to celebrate and reflect on what was White Shirt Day and what it represents and how its meaning originated from what we now know as the sit-down strike. What did it do? Just being brief, it changed and challenged the way the present auto workers and suppliers and the working class learned to strategize of how to fight back against the abusive bosses, corporations, and the companies they work for. It also taught the working class citizens how to get involved and fight for the jobs within their local community. The Flint sit-down strike lasted 44 days in the winter of 1936 through early 1937. Strikers coordinated a strategic occupation of several GM factories with the assistance of the Women Auxiliary and Emergency Brigades. The news of this strike traveled across the country, even into our neighboring country of Canada, which you will hear more about in this presentation. I'm glad all of you have decided to join us today because we have a treat for you. We have a rare video of Bob Travis. This video is not widely known to the public, but thanks to Bill Bryce and a former UAW educator and the hard work of UAW new staff member, Zach Rio, you will possibly be among the first UAW members to have recently viewed this video. Our program will approximately last about 90 minutes. Permitting time, we'll have a question and answering section. Microphones will be muted during this event, but folks are encouraged to introduce themselves and their locals in the chat or the comment section. Please refrain from back and forth text conversations. Now let's get started. And here are our honored guests joining us today in order of presentation. Our guests are Neil Layton, Frank Hammer, Carol Travis, and Tony Lea. But before we hear from our honored speakers, we are going to hear from one of our late honored guests by spirit, but not forgotten, Bob Travis. Let me first give you some insight for what you need to notice while viewing this video. The Congress of Industrial Organization, CIO, was formed in 1935 as champions of the industrial unionism. Its predecessor, an old American Federal of Labor, had focused on representing white skilled trade workers only. The AFL tried to organize auto workers in Flint in 1934, but the auto workers would not have it. The CIO's approach organized all workers, clearly challenge past union practice. Bob Travis, a leader of the Flint sit-down strike, exemplified the CIO's approach. His pioneering leadership received recent words of praise from UAW President Shawn Fain, praise that has been long overdue. This video you're about to see was part of that program in 1978 through 1979 at the University of Detroit, titled Labor Unsung Heroes. Travis died soon after. Labor educator and UAW member William Bryce, who briefly appears in this video, has lent his support in each of the three white shirt commemorations which the UAWD has produced. We thank him for his indispensable support. The 30-minute black and white video is grainy. It was recorded with a Sony Portapak, the first portable video system using a half-inch tape. It was forgotten but rediscovered decades later and successfully digitized. Brother Travis, this accompanies in this video by the legendary leader of Women's of Emergency Brigade, Janora Johnson Dollinger, who you will see sitting behind him. Even though recovering at the time from a stroke, Brother Travis' courage and leadership style comes through in a wonderful storytelling. With the UAW and the labor movement under renewed attack by the occupants in the White House, thousands of wannabe Travis will do well and learn from this example. Please listen carefully. We now present to you this recently rediscovered but rare video footage. Please enjoy this video presentation.
We organized because of, you remember the Auto Labor Board? The Auto Labor Board set up the right of company unions. We had a company union in Flint, in Chevrolet in Flint, in Detroit, in Toledo. We elected one member of that committee on the Auto Labor Board, a member of what we considered a progressive, Jimmy Rowland. Jimmy was in their hair all the time, even though the rest of the members were just stooges for the company, or foremen and so forth. He was so bad that on one day they fired Jimmy. We went to work one morning. We found Jimmy Rowland all alone, out in front of the plant with the picket sign. There wasn't another member in the plant. So we asked Jimmy, told Jimmy, wait till we see him. We'll meet you at noon. Go right across the street, there's a little restaurant. We'll meet you there and we'll talk about it. We talked about with Jimmy Rowland, and we were able to, as a result, set up an organizing committee. And in about 2 months, we had that place organized and we had it on strike. So we stopped all Chevrolets throughout the United States as a result of transmissions. Nobody could, I don't care whether they had a body or a motor, they couldn't run without a transmission. 6 months later, first I must tell you that our committee in there ran that shop. When we said that line was too damn fast, we slowed it down. And if a foreman got tough, we dumped him out the window. They hated us. So 6 months later, they split the transmissions into 2 plants. Our plant, and they moved 1,500 of our jobs up to Saginaw, Michigan, into a scab plant. That made, there's 1,500 of our members were out down the drain as a result of General Motors splitting the plant. Then came along CIO. We developed into what we now know as UAW CIO. Got our charter. Our charter, Local 14 in Toledo. Local 12 was the big local downtown. We were the little local, Local 14, with about 1,600 members left. We did work in every shop. We were rubber, in dress, women that sold dresses in the shop downtown. We get on, pick at that chef plant. We get down, pick at the leading cafeteria, and wherever there was any trouble, they always called on Local 14. We had what we called a flying squad of 50 men. In 15 minutes, one man would call 5, and one other man would call 5. We could get 50 men together in 15 minutes and down wherever it was needed. We got a tremendous reputation in Toledo. They were scared to death of us. If wherever, they didn't call on Local 12 or anyplace else. They said, let's go out to Local 14 and get some help. And we helped in the auto light strike. And this is one to tell you a little bit. In the auto light strike, we had, they called in the militia, you remember? Knocked all the pickets out in front of the building. There was, the building was one side, and the auto light was over here, and it was the residences over here. Back of the residences was trees. We took a tube, a rubber inner tube, cut it like this, and put it down, and put it up in the crotch of a tree way up. We'd have to run up and reach up and get it and take a break. Up over the house. And they didn't know where the hell the bricks are coming from. I went to Flint. I had little Willies. I don't remember, any of you people ever remember little snub-nosed Willies about that looked like a Volkswagen. And I went up there and I saw 45 to 50,000 workers changing shifts. Buick, Chevrolet, going 7 or 8, 10,000 going in, 7 or 8 or 10, 20,000 coming out. And it just overwhelmed me. I never saw so many workers in my life. It scared the life out of me. I went back and got in my car, went back to the truck and said, this is no place for me. I don't know what to do. Mortimer and Addis convinced me that I must stay there because nobody else has been able to do it. There wasn't any you could take any learning from. They didn't know either. The AFL tried it and they fell on their face 2 years before. A couple of hundred, thousands of men, they tore up their AFL cards because AFL couldn't do it. So I said, well, if I stay over 2 weeks, I'm out of a job. And they said, don't worry, you'll be all right. We'll take care of you, and you'll take care of you. Yes, they did. So I went to Detroit, or to Flint. Mortimer had been there before me. Mortimer had developed a real base. A real base in what he did was send out about 1,000 letters, not a newspaper, but letters, 1,000 a week to workers that he would pick out of the city directory in Flint. We couldn't buy any newspaper space. We couldn't buy any radio. There wasn't any television at that time. When I got to Flint, here's what I found. 50,000 workers. I was overwhelmed with it. There was no blueprint. The mayor, city manager, and governor, all anti-union. It was prior to the election of Murphy. It was Governor Fitzgerald was his name. An anti-union from the guy's start. We had a mayor, and the mayor was a Republican, a former executive at the Buick Company. Police Chief Wills was a former member brought down from the mines up in northern Michigan because of his strike-breaking record. The plant guards were either recruited by the former police chief or in part having killed strikers, and that way you would okay to becoming a plant guard in the General Motors. And the Black Legion. In Fisher 1, we had the Black Legion there, organized by GM. They made black, it was a counterpart of the Ku Klux Klan, except that instead of white sheets, they had black hoods. They called themselves the Black Legion, and that they, in the sewing room in Fisher 1, on Saturdays and Sundays, women were brought in to make hoods and arrangements so that they couldn't be seen for the Black Legion in Flint. This was attested to by Harry Anderson, Vice President of General Motors, before the La Follette Committee in Washington, when he testified that he wrote a letter to a member of the DuPont company and said, what you fellas need is a Black Legion like we have in Flint. I had 1,500 guys lose their jobs in Flint. They're in Toledo because of what we proposed to do, and General Motors took us 1,500 men out and put them in Saginaw into a scab shop. I had revenge, not only to help the workers in Flint, but also to organize especially those workers in Saginaw and the transmission plant that they stole from us. Mort had made many contacts in the groups, and I'd say our basis of our security, as Janor has told you, was the fact that we all work together. I don't care whether they were communists, socialists, TPOers, proletarian parties, New Americans, or no matter who they were. If they wanted to be General Motors, we wanted them and we needed them. And we needed unity, and I never departed from that all the way through. Janor says there was a little factionalism. There wasn't any factionalism when it comes to General Motors. We went after everything we had. We had to. How can you live on we lived on less than $25 a week. Every man, tar paper shacks, no cars, nothing. Even the small businessmen were completely intimidated. Every little restaurant keeper. I've been in a restaurant and been kicked out of a restaurant because I was a CIO man. Because in a little 2x4 hot dog joint, they didn't want me in there because General Motors would know that they were okay. As I indicated, that this executive was loaded with stool pigeons. Not only was the executive, there were some other stool pigeons throughout the whole plant. Gentlemen, imagine they agreed to the La Follette Committee. They spent over $900,000 that year on industrial espionage and stool pigeons, particularly in manufacturing end. We had to get rid of them. So I went before the local, about this size. That was the number of people we had in our local to begin with. I asked them for the right to take over the local union, not take it over in terms of policy, but in terms of the right to any card to come in, any new member was to come to me. No, should not go through the office, should not go into the executive board anymore. I investigated the girl in the office and found that she was the daughter of the plant guard, chief plant guard at AC Spark Plug. Back there, I see Jinx back there. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. And we brought in women from Detroit that we could trust, union women. And we began to issue these weekly papers. Flint Auto Worker. Couldn't buy it, couldn't get on the radio. We had to go out there to the plant. Here was a guy with 7 kids, his wife, come out there with these little kids handing out the papers. And let me tell you that the workers took them like crazy. Well, here's when I went into Flint, the local I've forgotten what the local number was in the original one. There were 11 members on the executive board. 7 of them were turned over as stool pigeons. The secretary, how did we find these stool pigeons? We found them with the help of the United States government, and at that point, I emphasize that point, we had the support of the Followed Labor Committee and the investigators that came in, who had subpoena power. We subpoenaed the phone numbers of every man on the executive board and found that 7 of them were working for either Pinkerton, Athol, Corporation Auxiliary, or the one in Baltimore. 5 different insurance detective agencies, stool pigeon agencies. That's how we got them. And Genora was there at the time that we exposed 2 of them, right on the floor of the Chevrolet local. And we took our picture. We sat downstairs. We gave them one to count it and said, "Look, you can. We know there's at least 2 stool pigeons here. We'll give you a chance to come up first." We counted 10. Neither one of them come up. Finally, I said, I said, "Here's John Starr, right sitting right down there. Come on." So the guy said, "Hey," they wanted to break him apart. We brought him up in front, sat him down on a chair, sat down after a photographer, took his picture this way, You know that when we got our picture back, that son of a pup had crossed his eyes, and he hardly recognized the guy. I won't take too much time, except that I want to give you some of the highlights. I used to be able to talk all night, but I can't anymore. In Fisher 1, highlight to begin with was the firing of the Parker brothers. And I'll tell you how that happened. These guys, not Parker, but Perkins brothers. They came in to work one night. They worked in the body and white. They got fired by the foreman. And he said, "Now, wait a minute. I got a call from Chick Ananich." I don't know whether any of you people remember Chick Ananich or not. But the Perkins brothers were fired. Maybe this was the thing that would start. So I had a little office across the street, Fisher 1 office, and out at the top of the door I had a red bulb. And when I had a flasher on that. When I turned that flasher on, that meant there was a stewards meeting. There was a steward we had in Fisher 1. So that night, it was at 8 to 8:30. It was at night. Went out there and I explained that they were taking the Perkins brothers and firing them. What are we going to do about it? And they said, "Well, shut them down." And I said, "Now wait a minute, don't be too rush. You must understand what a strike means." And so they said, "Fine." He went back in. Vic Ruther was with me at that time. And we walked up in front. If you've ever been in Fisher One, it's right on Saginaw Avenue. It's very close to the street. Vic and I both walked up and down that. We'd hear that motors running and the conveyors running, and then, gee, they didn't do it. Finally, all at once, the windows began to open. Chick and the rest of them said, hey, there was about 5 or 6 floors. They said, hey, we got it all. That's when the strike started. Next day, we went into, that night, while we had it down, they went in to see the assistant plant manager, said, we want these guys, Perkins Brothers, back to work. I said, oh, okay. What do you mean? He said, this is what we say. We elected a committee, and left half the committee outside and half went in, wanted to make sure that everything was taken care of. And he said, you can't tell us. I said, well, you want your plant to run? He said, I want you guys to go back to work, or I'll fire everyone. I said, fire the whole plant? I said, that's good. It's all right, we're all fired, we're all fired. And he said, wait a minute now. He said, I can't get these guys back in, they're going home already. I'll get them back Monday morning. This was on a Friday night. We said, nope, tonight, right tonight. So he said, how am I going to get them tonight? He said, give him a ring. So he rang Perkins Brothers, one man called, he got him on the phone, he said, yeah, but the other Perkins Brothers is out with his girl, he's gone to a movie. So the plant manager reported that to us, and he said, that's too bad. We propose you telephone, have the police telephone every movie plant in town, ask for this guy to come back. And we stayed down, hear this guy come back in. The police finally we put him on the radio that he was to report to Fisher Body immediately. Finally, after 2 hours and a half or 3 hours, we were still down. Said, come on back. He came back in, he was dressed in his good clothes. He said, I can't go to work this way, I got to go home and train. We said, all right, we'll wait. And we waited until he come back. That is the spark that set Flint on end. In every plant in town, realized that we put 2 men that were fired back to work, and we did it with the strength of the workers that night, and by Monday morning, we began the process of organizing. That was the first one. We're in Plant 9, we're Lobsternight, Genora, yeah, they were wonderful guys. I had to tell somebody, and I had to make it as few as possible. And finally, Henry and Roy both said, you're right. And Roy, at that point, took me and said, we got it now. We know what you mean. So we told these 30 shop stewards that Plant 9, both Roy, Henry, and I, both had one hell of a time convincing these shop stewards Plant 9 was a bearing plant. It made bearings there. They argued with me a half an hour or an hour that bearings could be bought any place. General Motors could buy bearings. If we shut that plant down, they could still buy bearings and keep their production going. Roy and I and Henry both convinced after an hour or so that we had checked the sewing sizes and shaft sizes and so forth, and there wasn't another shaft size. They had a whole new production for whatever bearing they wanted to buy. I told Ted LeDuc and Tom Clacy, these two are my 2 guys in Plant 9, that I wanted them. I told them that we didn't want Plant 9, we wanted Plant 6. Plant 6 was the fender and body fender and parts plant. About 6,000 workers in Plant 6. I didn't want Plant 6. Didn't want Plant 9. I wanted Plant 6. We were so surrounded by stool pigeons. I didn't know who I could trust and who I couldn't. So these two were left-wingers who I pretty much were sure that they were stool pigeons. I trusted them that we were going to go to Plant 6. I went to Plant 6 and I took a guy by the name of Bill Roy out of this shop steward group, and I said, Bill, I want you to, tomorrow morning when you go in, take an American flag and stick it in your shirt. I went there, and at 3:20, I wanted to get a full shift of union men on days and a full shift of union men coming in. I want the union men on days to stay and the union men coming in because we're going to fight. And the same is true as in every plant. I told Ed at 3:20, get up and start yelling and hollering and waving the American flag. Because all of these guys that we had had at the meeting knew that something was going to happen. They didn't know what. When they knew that Ed was a leader in their plant, and they see the flag waving, we were really, Ed and Carl Bibber. I just want to read you some of the names. I've forgotten his name. All we did, we called him Chief. Huh?
Clive Males.
Clive Males, yes. We called him Chief all the time. Clive Males. I'd forgotten his name. I forgot a hell of a lot. I could speak her.
Go by, Bob.
Anyhow, we went in and we took all the Plant 6 men out and Plant 6, and we asked Ted LeDuc and Tom Plessy to fight for just 1/2 hour, to watch your watch. If we couldn't do it in an hour, we couldn't do it. Those men did a wonderful job. They organized all the workers in the Plant 9, and let me tell you, that's where I get so much satisfaction out of foxing old Nazi Lenz, because he had every plant protection man in Chevrolet, he had every sheriff, he had every policeman, he had every supervision, and the whole plant. We could see them leaving about 3 o'clock, going on, and stooges over to Plant 9. And we have them over there, and we walked into, Ed Kronk walked into Plant 4 along with the guys. Kermit was in there in Plant 4 and took it over and welded the damn gates. Take the food in through the front door and up the second floor to all the strikers up on top. This time, they wouldn't let the food in. This time, they had organized the thing. The cameras were out there, the police were out there, the reporters were there. They knew what was going on. They set it up. All set it up. So we called, Janora was there. We asked Janora, and we asked the women, and we asked the men, all right, everybody out to Fisher. And we took guys from Fisher 1 that were on strike, that were on the union, down into Fisher 1. We brought guys from Buick. We had guys from Toledo, from Cleveland, from Lansing, from Saginaw, from Janesville, Wisconsin, Norwood, Ohio. All of these union men had been asked to come in, not paid organizers, but asked to come in to help to win the strike. They too had their problems. They all came in. They came down in front with the women, and we were able to make the bulls run. We turned over their cars, set them on fire.
Thank you, Zach, for finding and uncovering that rare gem. The lessons from Bob Travis still have value for present-day workshop members and their unity to stand up against the company. Now, let's move along. Let's keep it moving along, and let's get into our panels of speakers. Brothers and sisters, our first speaker studied and taught trade unions abroad in South Africa, and in the past have taught labor education for what was UAW Region 1C. He has interviewed sit-down strikers from 1977 through 1987, which was the 50th anniversary year of the sit-down strike. His interview also include Bob Travis, who you just heard from. He also conducted public oral history of the Flint sit-down strike. He is a retired professor of political science from the University of Michigan Flint. I present to you Neil Layton.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a kind of an unusual approach, but before I started, I wanted to mention something which Bob had brought up indirectly. When Bob came to Flint in 36, there was already in place on the part of General Motors a thing called the Mohawk Valley Formula. A lot of people don't know about this. It had been developed by James H. Rand, who was head of the Remington Rand Company, and was adopted by the National Association of Manufacturers. And it's the La Follette Commission, who Bob alluded to, exposed it. And what this plan was to go ahead and label strikers as agitators, to provide news media with ready-made speeches, editorials, cartoons, advertisements, movies. Some 12,000 newspapers were given editorials equating unionism with communism. It formed citizens, quote unquote, committees like the Flint Alliance, led by the former Flint mayor and the Buick paymaster, George Boyson. It hired a New York public relations firm to spread the word that a radical minority sought to impose a labor dictatorship on the United States. In the end, none of it worked because the changed circumstances within the UAW, its membership, and the growing sophistication of the labor movement brought about by Bob Travis. If all of that sounds familiar, just look at the newspapers, your TV set in a couple of hours, and you'll see basically the same thing going. One of the things that impressed me about Bob the most was that he, and I'll come back to this, Bob's whole career was to change the me in our society to we. I'll come back to this a little later, but he constantly refers to the people around him more than himself, and basically using the we. When he talks about Roy, which of course is Roy Ruther, and Henry, which is Henry Krause, and Mort, who's Wyndham Mortimer, who came from my hometown, Cleveland, by the way. These were always part of the various teams that Bob put together. And he assembled them, and it was always the we, the us, which was very difficult, not only in that time, but this time also, to get over this phrase, which we're so used to, what's in it for me. All of this was very clear when I went to interview Bob, which was around the time of the video. I went out to California. I don't have the things in front of me, but it must have been somewhere around 79 to 80, 81, somewhere in there. And I said to Bob, I knocked at the door and came in, and some of the sit-downers from Flint had sent Bob the word that I was okay. And so I went to the house and I said, well, Bob, I've got to drive down and find a motel. He said, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stay here at the house. So that night when I went to bed, sitting on the nightstand beside me was Vic Ruther's fairly recently published book, The Brothers Ruther. So I opened the book, and inside was an inscription. And that inscription basically, and I'm paraphrasing it now, to Bob Travis, to whom none of this would have been possible. Well, I stayed with Bob for several days, interviewing him, and I let the recorder run, which was one of the better things that I did. I figured we could always edit out stuff. As it was, we didn't edit out much. While I was there, he invited retirees from, one was from the La Follette Committee itself. Others were people from the UAW founding days, from Flint and for other places. And so I had more than just an interview with Bob. I had interviews with people who had really helped him out quite a bit. Well, one of the things and alluded to in his video, and I wanted to talk about, was Bob was very aware of what we now call the gender gap. And one of those places which was abysmal in Flint, and Bob didn't talk about in the video, was AC spark plug. And the workers were overwhelmingly female. The conditions were terrible. They were frequently exposed to sexual harassment. They were paid less. There was no advancement. And so in the organization drives, he kept them in mind, although there wasn't a strike at the plant at AC. He drew several people out of that, including Nellie Besson Hendricks and some others who became leaders in the Women's Emergency Brigade. He was very much, as he alluded to with Janora sitting behind him, informing the Women's Auxiliary. The women were already quite active, and he began to see ways for them to use their skills, such as driving to various places. As he said, we didn't have access to the newspapers, to newspaper space, to radio, that type of thing. And so they could take messages by car and driving and keeping workers up to date on what was going in Flint in other towns, auto-producing towns. Out of the Women's Auxiliary, of course, came the Women's Emergency Brigade. And I urge you, if you've never seen the film With Babies and Banners, to take a good look at it. It was nominated for an Academy Award in documentaries in its time. The other thing that was quite advanced for the time was the question of race that Bob picked up. And he realized that there wasn't going to be any solidarity without everybody on equal footing. And one of the people he met with early on, who I did had a chance to interview later on, was a fellow named Henry Clark. And Henry Clark was an African-American from Louisiana who already had union experience because he had signed on as a mariner, a ship on a cargo ship sailing up back and forth to New York. And so when the migration took place and so on, coming from the south to the north, Henry came up to get a job in the auto industry. Well, Bob, one of the things that Bob did, which was very clever, in meeting with Henry Clark, and he did this with other people, he chose to meet in a church basement. And the idea was this notion that we would meet in secret because the bad guys were out there and we needed to solve this question, our questions, in kind of a cloistered manner. And it was it wasn't always necessary, but it worked. And it was kind of to enhance the idea of safety and togetherness. Now, one of the things in meeting with Henry Clark is that Henry worked in the foundry in Buick. Now, Buick technically didn't go on strike, but Bob had some union sympathizers in the foundry, and Henry organized them, one of whom was Prince Combs, who we did interview, and they were very important. Buick was at the time the largest of the plants in Flint and probably the largest auto plant in the world. And what they did was they identified union sympathizers working at Buick, both in the foundry and above, what we'd say above floors, white workers who were sympathetic to what was going. And they developed a dialogue between the foundry workers and some of the union sympathizers in the floors above. What was important about this was in the following summer, after the strike was over, elections were held at the various plants to see what union membership was like and whether the union was going to win the election and to represent them. Buick, Buick, I mean the UAW, no, I'm sorry, the General Motors management was so sure that Buick would never vote. But what happened is that in those months from the strike until the summer, organizing went on really outside of General Motors' view, and Buick voted in favor of the union. Another thing that Bob did was what I call the Balkan Bakery. That sounds rather weird, but as he mentioned that Wyndham Mortimer had come to Flint and established connections with people all over the place. And one of the people that he had talked to was Mrs. Evanoff. And Mrs. Evanoff was an immigrant from Macedonia. And she had come to Flint, she and her husband, and opened a bakery. But what they didn't know, General Motors didn't know, is she formed the Macedonian Bulgarian Workers Association. And it was those first and second generation workers from Eastern Europe that they met at least once a week. And Mrs. Evanoff, who was let's say a very strong leftist, she sang to me the Bolshevik marching song at one time, and she knew 5 verses to Solidarity Forever. At any rate, she helped organize a lot of the workers again in the Buick foundry because recent Eastern Europeans had to work in the foundry along with African Americans. She helped Bob in organizing, and her son, Mike Evanoff, became the UAW's first, you could probably say first on-site attorney. And his main job was to help to get the workers who were being tossed in jail, to get them out. He went on to become a very progressive lawyer. Well, Bob's experience was a huge asset for the strike. And he talked about his work in Toledo. And some of the people that he worked with, he had great luck with, and also Mort had helped him, and they played a role. And one of those was, he mentions, you heard him talk about Henry. There's a fellow named Henry Krause, and I urge you, if you've never read his book, to read it. A lot of people have read Sidney Fine's book, Sit Down. Henry Krause wrote a book called The Many and the Few. But Henry also brought up 30 kids from the University of Michigan to work in his press office. That's the best thing I can call it, to formulate press releases, messages, to go out, knock on doors. It was also people like Henry and some of the students and some of the other people who had technical skills who developed the sound car. By today's standard, it was pretty primitive, but the sound car, because they did not have access to the newspapers and radio, they essentially put a roving radio station through the streets of Flint, which drove the city officials nuts. And Vic Ruther drove that for quite a while and spoke and gave messages through it. Also, the women, Bob also, as I mentioned earlier, the working women began to, in the emergency brigade and the auxiliary, began to serve in terms of not only protesting, but blocking off, keeping the police out of the plants, because on the notion that the police would not hit a poor woman. Sometimes that didn't work. Because of Bob's work, the sit-down strike, Bob's and others, but became a worldwide phenomenon. It passed even beyond Canada or Mexico. And one of the things that I came across was, of course, the New York Times carried it on the front page and carried it for much of the strike, from not quite December 30th when the strike took place, but throughout January and into February 11th. But there was one nice little touch, somewhere I have a copy of it, on the front page of the London Times. Now, the London Times in those days was basically the front page was all advertising. And the news was after you flipped the advertising page, then the news began. But on the front page, amongst the advertising, in a heavily black outlined little announcement, said, Flint, Michigan, great strike is ended. That's pretty good when you could make the London Times in those days. Bob and his team knew about previous sit-downs in Europe, in Renault and Citroën, and in the US. There were sit-down strikes before the Flint sit-down, both at Firestone on the 29th of January and at Goodyear 2 days later on the 31st in Akron. Now, I wanted to get to this, back to this question of we, and I'll end with this. Where did Henry Krauss get the title for his book, The Many and the Few? This whole question of we, Bob was certainly not the first organizer to deal with it, but he certainly was one of the most successful. His wife had told me that he probably in his lifetime had managed to organize 1.5 million workers. So he got the title. Well, where he got it was from a poem. And a poem I urge you to read. It's old. It was written in the 1830s by one of the great British poets. And his name was Percy Shelley. You may have heard of him. And he wrote a poem. It's a long thing. It's brilliantly written, but it is about a labor strike in 1830s in Manchester, in England, where the workers had the living hell beat out of them. They lost. And so he wrote this poem. I'm only going to read 4 little lines from it, but I urge you to read it. It's called The Mask of Anarchy. And it has as much going for it today as it did then. And one stanza is, rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. We are many, and they are few. That's as true today as it was then. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil, for such historic educational words. It's people like you that help preserve our UAW strike history. And we'll moving along. Our next honored guest is Frank Hammer. I'll let him take 30 seconds to introduce himself, and he will also give us an opening introduction to our next guest speaker. I give you Frank Hammer.
You're good to.
You're good to go.
You're muted, Frank. Let me see if I can force unmute you.
Oh.
Here we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Well, I want to thank Eric for leading this this tribute. I want to thank Neil Layton for this indispensable work. I want to give a shout out to UAW President Shawn Fain, who has now resurrected the memory of Bob Travis. And I also want to give a shout out to Scott Holdison, who's the chair of the UAWD. I believe he's working today. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have joined us. So I'm Frank Hammer, retired president and chairman at UAW GM Local 909, just outside of Detroit, and a co-founder with many others of the UAWD. I'm privileged to introduce my very good friend, UAW sister Carol Travis, daughter of Bob Travis, who we honor today as a true UAW hero. Carol, as you will learn, is a hero in her own right. Sister Travis traces her own activist roots back to her protests in the 60s in the streets of New York as part of the mobilization to end the war in Vietnam. As a staff member there, she organized the Nixon inauguration and at the 1968 Democratic Party riots in response to the Vietnam War. Later in that decade, she was a co-founder of a small national organization, Sojourner Truth, based on the foundational importance of the working class and the understanding of the key divisive role of white supremacy in the U.S. I got to know her in the 1970s when she worked for 20 years at the GM locomotive plant outside Chicago. There, she was elected president of her UAW Local 719, representing 10,000 members until retiring in 1992. Kira also worked on the line at several sweatshops and at Motorola and Zenith assembling TVs. Sister Travis worked for the SEIU in many capacities for 13 years, including major contract negotiator in the public sector and education director of the SEIU Illinois State Council. After 5 years of night school, Carol became a lawyer. As she tells it, she was part of an amazing litigation team led by the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York City that successfully changed California's practice of long-term indefinite solitary confinement. Over 3,000 men got out of solitary. Some had been in for 40 years. Sister Travis was an active and leading member of Pacifica Foundation for 5 years. Pacifica is the only national radio network totally free of corporate funding. The network consists of 5 radio stations and hundreds of local affiliate stations, including the broadcasters of Democracy Now! Anyway, I want to welcome Carol. Take it away. It's great to have you. Thank you.
I am turning unmute. Yes. Hi. This is very moving to me, seeing my father. Just, he died in 1979, Neil. So you saw him before that. I want to tell you a few things about the strike that people may already know, but I want to highlight them as to make points about lessons from the strike, and then have a quick discussion of how those lessons might be applied today. Because I assure you that my father would not have wanted something about him as fascist, racist, oligarch, strongmen are destroying or having a cataclysmic event here that's rocking the world, in addition to rocking the United States, without some discussion of that. So, okay, so the points I will make, I cut them down, by the way. So, first of all, why my father was chosen to go to Flint, because he said he didn't really understand it. And it was Addis, who was the first financial secretary of the UAW, and Mort, who was his mentor. He loved Mort a lot, and who was the first vice president of the UAW, who argued that he should be the person who replaced Mort. In 1935, in April, there was a strike at the plant that he described, the Chevrolet transmission plant that he described in the video, where they were really organized and tightly in charge of things. And William Knudsen, who was the president of the Chevrolet division of General Motors, went to Toledo to try and stop the strike and put it down and so on. But what, of course, he found was a very tightly organized, strong shop that really was running things there as described in the video. By the way, I think when they threw a foreman out of the plant window, I think it was probably on the first floor because he wouldn't want to have the police come in for a murder charge or something. But anyway, so Knutson came, went to Toledo and was met with this really strong organization and with my father, who was a charming, charismatic guy with a great laugh, who was easily made a lot of friends and could talk to strangers very easily, but was strong, just as he, when they said, you know, we can't bring the Perkins brothers back until Monday, it was like, no, it's tonight. He had that kind of attitude in Toledo also. And although there was no signed contract, it was understood by the leadership of the UAW, which was young at that time, that what happened there in those negotiations was, for the first time, Knutson recognized, with not in writing, but in fact, that the union had a right to have something to say about the conditions of work. And so Addis, who was from Toledo, and Mort, who was always in touch with my father, Mort was about 15 or so years, maybe, 15 years older than my father. So he was really, somebody my father trusted and relied upon. So that's why he was sent there. And even though he always told me, he got there and he was like, what am I going to do here? It's so crazy. There's so much going on. But you already heard, particularly through the video, of the stuff that Mort did to lay the groundwork in many arenas and so forth. And you heard about the Perkins brothers. There was, you heard about the taking of cards so that people who signed cards wouldn't be fired. Previously to the previous UAW executive board there, which was really all the Pinkerton and company spies people, would turn the cards over to management. So if people joined the union, they'd lose their job. So the protecting of the cards, the Mort stuff. Mort also, when he did the organizing, a lot of stuff he did was he had secret meetings in people's houses, and he would find somebody through the various letters and so on, and talking to people and trustworthy people, and he would go over to the house of the people he wanted to have a meeting at, and he wouldn't just meet with the man, who was usually the worker, although sometimes it was the woman, but the man and his wife and family as a whole, and talk about, would you be comfortable with this? Would you like it? He didn't just deal with the man, more dealt with the woman and the man, and also said, if you're willing to have a meeting, the union will pay for either coffee and cake or ice cream and, cookies. You decide what you would like to have. If you want to have refreshments, and we'll provide them. We'll get them for it. We'll pay for it, and we'll get them for it. So he was always connecting with people as another human being, and being kind and generous. And so that laid the foundation. And the Perkins brothers, but before the Perkins brothers, there was another event at a shift change. There was a particularly nasty foreman, and at shift change, which was described briefly when Dad said about going to Flint and being overwhelmed by the thousands of people coming and going. So he did it during shift change, and he went up in a very dramatic way to this nasty my father said, son of a pup. So I'll try and follow his lead, and got in his face and said, but didn't say that there. I said, listen, you son of a bitch, we know who you are. We know what you do. You treat people like dogs. We will not tolerate that. The union will not put up with it. And we know where you live. And it became sort of a big thing because people were like, whoa, look at this, watch that. So these combination of things that were done led to an understanding that the union actually now was a real union, wasn't the union that had 7 members who were all company spies and Pinkertons. And anyway, okay. Another thing I wanted to just point out was my dad said that, oh, wait, first, I wanted to do this because Neil referred to this. This is the book that was beside the bed when Neil visited. And what it says is to Bob and Helen Travis, May 18th, 1976. No one person was more key to the historic struggle of Flint in early 1936-37. No one contributed more to building the self-confidence and overcoming fear than you, Bob. You will ever remain to each of the Ruther brothers, friend and brothers. Warm regards, Victor. By the way, Victor told me once when I was in Flint, where I met him during the 50th anniversary, he said, your father somehow had the ability to convince people that they could do something that they never thought they could do, because here there were these little houses in the shadow of this giant corporation that not only was big in the United States, but it was one of the biggest corporations in the world. And he was able to give people confidence somehow that they could do what they did. Anyway, Victor told me that. And also Victor, I was attacked when I was running for president of my local, and I was somebody put, probably I don't know who, put out a leaflet saying that I was whatever they were saying. I was somebody that they couldn't trust, and it was a very weird leaflet. I wish I had a copy of it. And I called Victor because it said in the leaflet that Victor Ruther said that my father was a scab. And so I called Victor because I had met Victor in Flint. And I said, I read him the leaflet, and he said, what would you like me to do? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'd really like you to do. And how about if we work back from that? And he said, okay. So I said, I'd like you to fly to Chicago tomorrow, because the election is Tuesday. This was like Sunday. So I was saying he should fly on Monday. The election is Tuesday, and I'd like you to come Tuesday morning to the Union Hall where the election is going to be taking place, and stand with me. And so I can put out a leaflet that you're coming. And what they said was BS. And so Victor said, hold on. And he talked to Sophie, his wife, and he said, tomorrow is Sophie's birthday, her 70th birthday. And she said for her birthday present that he should go. So he flew to Chicago the next day, and I picked him up, and then we went to the Union Hall, and then he stayed for about 3 or 4 hours, and then one of the guys who was off shift from my group drove him back. But anyway, okay. So another lesson from Flint. My father always said that it was very important that Governor Murphy was the governor, because, he sent in the National Guard not to expel the strikers, which is what had been asked for. He refused to do that. He refused to order the Guard to suppress the strike. And when he sent the National Guard, it was to protect the workers, and the property. By the way, he probably would have been a presidential candidate, but his so leaning toward labor, so progressive, it ended up, though, he was a U.S. attorney and then a Supreme Court justice. But as we can see today, it is important who is in the government. It matters. There was a moment where there was a false peace after the Battle of Running Bulls, which was January 11th and 12th. On January 14th, there was a settlement, and that the plant was going, all the plant would be empty. The strikers would leave, and that there would be, it was a very weak settlement. And Homer Martin was the president of the UAW then, and he was a weak leader. And so he had agreed to this, settlement. And so in a day or two, they were going to empty, the strikers would vacate the Fisher Body plant. But a reporter, a UP reporter named Bill Lawrence, showed up at the hall looking for my father, and Henry Krause, interceded, and the guy said, give him a break. He's works night and day, and the guy said, this is very, very important. And so Henry, with Bill Lawrence, tracked down my father. They found him. And it turns out that Bill Lawrence was over in a GM, because he was a journalist, he was over in a GM office. And he saw a piece of paper that was a press release that was going to be given out the next day after the plant was emptied. And the press release said that the Flint Alliance was going to be given the rights to represent the workers in most of the plants in Flint. And my father called Homer Martin, who said, oh, don't worry about it. And then my father called Brophy, who was a CIO guy with John L. Lewis in Washington. And Brophy called Murphy, and that was nixed. So the settlement was called off, and the plant was not emptied. And let's see, there was one other lesson. Oh, the other lesson was the meeting that decided on the taking of Plant 6 was a meeting that both my father had talked to me about occasionally, but Victor told me a lot about it after my father was dead. And he told me that it was so interesting because it was a time near it was in February, the meeting was in February, they called people, and it felt like they were losing the strike because there had been so much work on, there were a lot of people out of work who had not been union members, because having the Fisher Body plant closed, there were lots of people out of work. And so the Flint Alliance and so on was doing, and the Black Legion and so on, doing all kinds of work to say the strike's got to end. These people are, we're starving. We don't have any, it's a cold winter. We need this and that. And so they were losing the strike, and it was feeling very nervous. And so the strike was called. And what Victor said was, it was so interesting that my father got up and he said he pulled a chair to the edge of the stage. And instead of having this, speech that was like, we're going to do this now, we're standing up, we've got to stay together. Instead, he pulled a chair to the edge of the stage and he said, we're in trouble now, and we're having a bad time. And we know that there are a lot of spies and stool pigeons and Pinkerton here. And so I'm asking you, as the activist leadership group, it was a couple of hundred people, to give me and a small group of people the authority to make some secret plans. And they were the group said yes, but Victor was just like, it was so interesting because it was like he was having an intimate conversation in the living room with somebody, but it wasn't just with somebody, it was all this people. And so the people said yes. And so they said, okay, we're going to have you leave. And maybe you all know this story, but it's such an important story and makes several important points. We're going to leave by the side door that goes through that little room that on the side, and you're going to come through one at a time. And we will start the process of figuring out the secrecy stuff that you've authorized us to do. So the guys would go out, or the men and women would go out one at a time. And in that little room, it was totally dark except for a couple of candles, which would light the person who was coming through, but you couldn't see who was sitting back there. And they said, we're going to give each one of you a piece of paper, and most of you are going to get a blank piece of paper. But some of you are going to get a piece of paper that has the time and place of a meeting. And you are to tell no one that you got that piece of paper. And no one is to know that you got the piece of paper, much less what it says. And it was they made this very strict. And so people came through. So out of that, they picked a certain number of people to come to this meeting. They intentionally included two stool pigeons who they knew because of Charlie Johnson and the La Follette Committee getting the phone records of various people. And so they included two company spies. So they had the meeting, and my father and like two or three other people, and it didn't include Victor or Roy, made an argument to go to plant 6, the bearings plant. He talked about that in the video, when in fact they were going to go to 4. But so they finally came to a thing that they were going to go to the bearings plant to 6. And as a result, he said that one thing. He said, it just made me feel so good when I saw that Nazi lens and all his cops and guards and stuff and going to the wrong place. And what they had told the guys in 6 is, you just fight like hell for a half an hour. Just fight like hell for a half an hour. Because if we can't pull this off in an hour, it can't be pulled off.
Excuse me, Carol.
It was pulled off. Anyway, so now to the lessons, I think, that are important today. It matters what the government, well, the differences between today and then. Today we have a totally hostile, crazy bastards, racist pigs in charge of the government. And now there was no internet and no television then. The lessons, I think, from here is you need to do groundwork. You need to build a trusted base of people. You need to watch out for spies. You should check on any kinds of deals you're making, because of they can, they lie to you. People love drama. That's the one thing my father said. People love drama. So the thing of going through this thing and so on, it makes your blood, that you're part of something that's important and secret and so on. Out of the box thinking can save the day. Leadership matters. Secrecy is important. Anyway, so here's a couple of ideas. I think that there are Trumpers in the UAW, maybe less now that they're carrying out their crazy plans, but it's important to get small groups of trustworthy friends together. And there's siloed information today. What you and I may understand about what's going on, people who just listen to Trump and stuff think something else. They have a totally different worldview about what's happening. And so there are some things we know that they don't know. And also there are some things that they know that we don't know. For example, now the farmers are angry at Trump because of what he did to USAID, the Ag Department, pardon me. And I think that personal relationships are much safer, they're more secret, they're more meaningful than internet stuff or phone calls. And if you're going to do stuff today, we don't know how crazy the bastards are or how long this will last. But it's important to start building and getting in the habit of doing some things in secret and having a secret group of people to do things. And
Excuse,
I think that they could have leaflets, for example. There
I'm
could
sorry,
be-
Carol.
Yeah.
We're running up close to our hard stop time, and I want to make sure that Tony gets a chance to talk.
Can I say
Of course.
3 more minutes?
I think.
This is the end. This is the
Go
wind
ahead.
up.
Go
the
ahead. Go ahead.
pitch.
Go ahead.
This is the wind up and the pitch.
Go ahead.
So one leaflet on Trump and Musk and firing workers. Get that information on a piece of paper with your friends and get it into the plant in the bathrooms, on the cards in the parking lot. A leaflet on the head of the Federal Administration administration and hiring freeze when there's already a shortage of air traffic controllers, and getting leaflets out to the airports. Things like that. I think we need activity on the ground that undermines their story. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carol, for sharing such your knowledge of the events of the past. And may you continue educating our UAW membership. All right, moving on to our next speaker. Our next speaker on our panel is a longtime union activist with bargaining experience, shop floor representation, labor education, and political mobilization. He has held many positions within the Auto Workers Union, Oshawa, of Oshawa Local 222, and on the Canadian national level. Editor and auditor of many articles on labor history and activities, holds a master's degree in labor studies from McMaster University. I give you Tony Leah.
Hello, everybody. I want to touch on one thing which I think is incredibly important about the Flint sit-down strike, and that is that it inspired not only workers in GM and in the auto industry in the United States, it led to a strike wave across the United States, and it inspired people internationally. And Neil already mentioned, the London press. But I want to talk about the inspiration of this strike in Canada because it had a huge impact in Canada. The victory in Flint on February 11th of 1937 really spurred the organizing effort that was going on in Canada amongst auto workers and in the major General Motors plant in Canada, which was outside of Toronto in Oshawa. And that assembly plant had a walkout on February 19th. So just days after the successful conclusion of the Flint sit-down, and that led to a UAW organizer being sent to Oshawa at the request of the workers there to help lead the organizing, and it had a huge impact. The Flint strike was big news all across North America. The Toronto Star, the biggest paper in Canada, had front page coverage of that strike, including pictures of the National Guard machine gun placement that Neil talked about. And the victory of that strike was incredibly important. What the Flint strike and the UAW contributed to organizing in Canada is all around the idea of leadership and strategy. What was developed in Flint that we've heard about in this incredible presentation today, the lessons of it, the principles underlying it, is what was brought to Oshawa by the UAW. The idea of organizing workers as a class struggle unionism, recognizing the importance of equality of men and women workers and having women play a leading role in the strike was brought into the organizing in Oshawa. Organizing the community, which is the whole working class, was brought into Oshawa. And one of the most fundamental things, and we heard Bob Travis talking about this a little bit, is the role of stewards. And in Oshawa, when I was researching my book about the strike in Oshawa in 1937, I was absolutely blown away to learn that the UAW organizers, as part of building up for the successful strike in Oshawa, put in place union stewards in the plant. There were 3,700 workers in the plant. They had over 300 stewards. They had one steward for every supervisor. And that provides the base for the kind of organizing that Bob was talking about with the Perkins brothers. When you represent workers on the shop floor and mobilize their strength on the shop floor, you can do anything. And that was key to the victory in Oshawa. Along with that, there was tremendous support for the Oshawa strikers from the international leadership of the UAW. The international president visited Oshawa twice during the 16 days of the strike. The leadership of the UAW bargained on behalf of Oshawa with the GM headquarters in Detroit. The president of the UAW, when he was in Oshawa, arranged a conference call with 45 local presidents of all of the GM plants in the United States that were represented by the UAW to pledge support for the strike in Oshawa. And as a result of that, the workers in Oshawa won. They became part of the UAW, and it was the defining moment, that breakthrough that led to industrial unionizing in across Canada. And so that these are the lessons of the kind of leadership and strategy that was followed, of rank and file unionism, of class struggle unionism, that I think we all need to learn about for today. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. We very much appreciate all the hard work you've done, especially the solidarity that you've shown both in the US and Canada. I'm going to go to my technician at this time. I know we are at our 90-minute mark. Do we have time for the Q&A section, or do we need to move on?
I know that some folks have some union meetings to get to at this time, so
Okay.
I think we're gonna call it.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. Let me let me go to our close. I appreciate all of our speakers today. Let me go to our outro close, and so for this completes basically our presentation. UAWD want to thank all those of you that took your time out of your busy schedule to participate in this annual event. We hope that our speakers have given you some history and understanding of what the conditions were like in the past, just to build our union and for us to enjoy what we currently have. The fight is not over. The corporations will continue to test and take away every means we have to make an honest living. In healthcare, we need to survive from vicious punishment of the factories and repetitive work to our bodies that our bodies endure. We want to encourage you to visit UAWD at uawd.org, where you will find information about our movement for reform and rank and file growth. You can also visit our web store while you're there. There's also things that you can order, like shirts and hats like Frank is wearing, as well as other merchandise. And you can also wear those merchandise to show solidarity in your locals. Also looking up, you can also look on the website for upcoming events while you're there. And to join and become a member of UAWD, go to uawd.org/join. There will be a 1-year, $25 annual maintenance fee, but that fee is just to help with programs like this that you're viewing, and also it goes towards the website maintenance. I'd like to thank our panelists and UAWD staffer, Zach Rio, for his hard work and technical support. Please visit our UAWD website at uawd.org once again and learn more about the reform movement that is in progress. I've been your host, Eric Truss. I hope you have a good day, and solidarity forever.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Solidarity, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Solidarity.
Forever.
Mhm.